Our speaker this evening has a very difficult task. How is he going to convince me to vote to extend a tax that doesn't expire until 2027? Number one. Number two, how is it going to benefit the people in this room? And number three, we want to know why a person who could probably have been the next mayor decided no. That's what people are here for. With that, I'd like to introduce our former city councilman and our current board supervisor member for 26 months more. So he has to accomplish a lot in 26 months. Zev Yaroslavsky.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. First of all, let me add my words of condolence on the passing of Alan Vukovic. Everything that's been said, I will associate myself with. I will just add that she was a persistent and indefatigable defender of the quality of life of Sherman Oaks, and she did it with so much class and gentility. She was never mean or angry. At least she didn't show her anger. And she was just a class act, a very pleasant human being to deal with. And I'm so sad to learn of her passing. I was not aware of this until I walked in the room. Somehow that slipped through our cracks. We will adjourn her memory at the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday. And to Peter and the family, I just want to add my sense of not only public loss as a public official, but a personal loss. She was always so nice to me and my staff, and it will come as quite a shock to them to learn this news as well. I want to also say, in memory of Connor Lynch, I will be here on October 14th. I will run the 5K, my Achilles tendon permitting, and I'm in good shape. I'm running every day, and I hope to set a recent personal best on the flat Sherman Oaks course, which is a good thing. And I'm so delighted that the energy that came out of that tragic accident a couple of years ago is going to help promote safety, traffic safety, pedestrian safety in our community. I'm a former cross-country runner myself at Fairfax High School. I remember the day when the accident took Connor, and I can remember all the times that our coach used to send us out into the streets of the Fairfax neighborhood to do our long 4 or 5 mile runs, and it never would have occurred to us that one of us would not come back. It's a tragic thing for the family, for the school here in Notre Dame, for the Sherman Oaks community, and for all of us. So I'm always looking for flat courses to run my 5Ks. I think I found one here for October 14th. So if you want to see me in shorts, if you want to see my legs, and on the other hand, you might want to stay home and not see my legs. It's your call. There are a couple of things I want to touch on, and then I'm going to speak mostly on Measure J, and then I'll open it up to questions that you may have, whatever the arrangement is, whatever the protocol is. Carmageddon 2 is upon us. It's September 29th and 30th, the weekend after this one. We expect that it will be a non-event. We hope it will be as undramatic as Carmageddon 1 was. I'll speak to the helicopter issue in a second. But in terms of traffic, we are urging people to stay home on the weekend if at all possible. Certainly don't go anywhere near the 405 corridor or the 101 corridor. The Sherman Oaks area feeds right into the 405. So if nobody cooperates, then we're going to have a mess on our hands. The only reason we didn't have a mess on our hands in July of last summer was that everybody was sufficiently on notice that we were closing the busiest freeway in America. 405 carries 500,000 cars a day on weekends, and none of the surface streets or the feeding freeways have the capacity to absorb 500,000 cars. So either people are going to stay out of their cars or at least stay out of the region, or we're going to have a mess in our hands. So I think I was interviewed by a reporter today, and he said, what's the message? I said, the message is just to get the word out that September 29th and 30th, the freeway is closed. Angelinos will figure out what to do. They are experts. If they're experts in nothing else, they're how to navigate traffic and what the do's and don'ts of traffic. So if you don't want to have an anxiety attack, if you don't want to get anxious or angry, don't come anywhere near the 405 corridor. Shop in the neighborhood. Go to the restaurants in the neighborhood. The greatest comment I had after Carmageddon 1 last summer was people said, you know, it was really fun to stay in the neighborhood. We met people we never knew before. We went to restaurants we never frequented before. And it's amazing how many of us think that a good time is getting in our car and driving halfway across the city to go somewhere else to eat or somewhere else to see a movie. If you're lucky in SHERMAN, you can do everything you need to do right here, and you can almost do it by walking, not quite, but certainly don't have to use the freeway. Now the helicopter issue, we've been talking to the news media. I don't know whether we're going to make an impact on the news media. They certainly have been bombarded by the local officials. They've been bombarded by Congressman Berman's hearing that some of you attended a few weeks ago at middle school. One of the great hearings of all time with the FAA, because we're trying to get the FAA to impose some regulations that will give the FAA the authority to regulate the height of helicopters in an urban area like this. It is ridiculous that helicopters, especially those of you who live in the hills, where the distance between the ground and the helicopter is even less than it is between the flatbeds and the helicopter. It is totally destructive of our quality of life. I've personally experienced this. I live, as the crow flies, about a mile from the British Consul General's home in Hancock Park. And when Prince William, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, were in the neighborhood last year, the helicopters hovered all day and all night long, I guess trying to get a risque shot. Is what they were, this is the way it is these days. But they hovered until after the 11 o'clock news was over. At 11:30, we finally had our peace and quiet. And the circumference, the radius of the circle that the helicopters were making was over a mile. And so they were over my house, they were over the houses a mile the other direction. It was impossible. I know what it was like in Sherman Oaks and Encino during Carmageddon. So we've asked the helicopter, we're not going to get the helicopters out of here, but we've asked them to maintain a decent elevation above ground level, wherever the ground is, so that there's enough distance to muffle the sound of the helicopters. And consider the people who live here. The guy who runs ABC, KABC Channel 7, lives in this community, and he knows what's going on. And we appeal to him directly, and hopefully we'll have some impact. Congressman Berman is trying to get legislation through the Congress that would authorize the FAA or require the FAA to regulate helicopter elevations, altitudes over urban areas like this. I brought to that hearing, those of you who were there, an audio recording from the Hollywood Bowl, which had just been 3-4 days earlier, where a Skyhawk helicopter, it's a military-sized helicopter, so it was a government helicopter. It wasn't a county helicopter, it wasn't the city helicopter. It was the Department of Homeland Security decided to buzz the Hollywood Bowl in the middle of the cadenza of a violin concerto, the Beethoven violin concerto, one of the most beautiful pieces you'll ever hear, the violin solo. And right as the violin solo was starting, here comes this Skyhawk, which is about as noisy helicopters you will find in the American repertoire, and went right over the Hollywood Bowl shell, right up the middle of the amphitheater. Didn't go around, which would have been bad enough, but it went right over the audience, which aside from being noisy, was also dangerous. And there's a regulation in the country today since 9/11 that a helicopter cannot fly over a stadium with 30,000 seats or more while it's in use. So they can't fly over the Coliseum during an SC game, can't fly over the Rose Bowl during a UCLA game. By the way, who was the only undefeated? It's been a long time since I've been able to make that statement. But over the Hollywood Bowl, which has 18,000 people, they can go right over without any problem. It's just as much a security risk as Anaheim Stadium or Dodger Stadium. So that's aside from the residential impacts that the helicopters have. So I want to just give a shout out to Howard Berman for what he's done. I think he spoke here about that a meeting or two ago. And he has taken up this cause, and we hope that it will have some impact on the FAA so that we can bring some rational flight patterns to our metropolitan area. This is not just a problem that affects Sherman Oaks. What was so interesting about that hearing is that people came from all over the region, Palos Verdes, the Torrance, the San Gabriel Valley, not just the San Fernando Valley, the west side. It was really quite stunning how many people were impacted by that. So that's a little update. Now, Measure J, which is on the ballot in November, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us. We passed in November of 2008, we passed Measure R, which was a half-cent sales tax to fund the construction of about a dozen mass rapid transit projects, quite a few highway projects, including many in the San Fernando Valley, the Hollywood Freeway, the Golden State Freeway, and other highways in the Los Angeles County area. It helps fund Metrolink, about 30% of the money funds Metrolink, the commuter train, and a whole host of things. But the thing that got my interest in Measure R in the first place, why I co-authored it with the mayor, was it was the only way to infuse some serious money into the mass rapid transit system. Light rail, busways, subway down Wilshire Boulevard, extension of existing light rail lines, so that we can really build a regional transportation network, which we don't quite have yet. And it's going to be a long time before we have it, but we have to start with something. And we passed this measure, you voted for it. We needed 2/3 of the vote. We got 68% of the people of LA County to vote for it in the middle of the economic collapse in November of 2008, which is an indication of how frustrated people are about transportation and wanted to do something about it. We were very specific about what that money would go for. It would go for extension of the Orange Line from Warner Center to Chatsworth. We already have the Orange Line from North Hollywood through Sherman Oaks to Warner Center. It funds the North-South Line busway that was spoken of a moment ago, which is in the process of being planned. That will go either up Van Nuys Boulevard, which is Muller Boulevard, and Sherman Oaks to Sylmar, so that you would have it in the San Fernando Valley with the subway at North Hollywood, the Orange Line, the East-West Orange Line to the Warner Center, the North-South Orange Line to Chatsworth, and a North-South line up the middle of the San Fernando Valley. You suddenly can see a transportation network here in the valley that will work. People say, why do we only have some people ask me, why do you only have a busway in the San Fernando Valley? The reason we have a busway in the San Fernando Valley is because we could afford it. We would be waiting decades to get anything more than that. And it has been a huge success. The public loves it. The transit riding public loves it. And about 20% of the people who rode the Orange Line when it opened were first-time users of our transportation system. So there are people in Sherman Oaks, and people in Encino and Tarzana and North Hollywood and Studio City who left their car at home, especially as gasoline had exceeded $5 a gallon at the time, and were heading for it again, and decided to leave their car at home and money in their pocket, and for $1.25, ride the Orange Line and connected it to the subway to downtown, or go to work at the Warner Center, wherever they may be. The Daily News ran a story the other day, or the other week, you may have seen it, about residents of Sherman Oaks who are now using the Orange Line to go to the subway and to connect to the Exposition Light Rail line, which we just opened last spring, to get to Culver City. That it's faster to do that kind of a circuitous route of public transportation than to get in your car and try to go over the canyons towards Culver City. This is what happens each time we build another line. you build an exposition light rail line, you're opening a vista, a transportation vista on an area which has never had transportation, it's never been connected to the public transportation system before. When we opened the Orange Line, it created a connection between the South San Fernando Valley and the Red Line subway for the first time. So you didn't have to get in your car if you lived in the West Valley or the Central Valley, Sherman Oaks. You didn't have to. You can now use public transportation to go downtown, to get to Pasadena, subway transfer to the Pasadena Gold Line. You can do all of that without ever having to get in your car. So every time we open another leg to our system, it's a whole that is bigger than the sum of its parts. So here's the rub. When we approved Proposition R, Measure R in 2008, there was a 30-year tax. It had a sunset 30 years from 2008, 2009. So it was going to go to 2039. That leaves that much money to build a series of projects. The 12 transit projects that I spoke of could not all be built in the first 10 years. You had to wait until the money came along. And so some of the projects were first decade projects. Some of the projects were going to be built in the second decade. And some of them were going to be built in 2039. What we have today is record low interest rates, all-time record low interest rates, and it looks like it's going to be low for a little bit longer if you believe the Federal Reserve. We have record low construction costs. Construction costs, adjusted for inflation, have never been as low as they are now because there's not a lot of construction going on. The only construction that's going on is public construction, projects like the light rail line, the Orange Line to Chatsworth, etc. So there are a lot of unemployed construction workers in Los Angeles. About 40% of our construction workers are unemployed in LA, in the LA County area. So low interest rates, the cost of money is as cheap as it's ever been, and the cost of construction is as low as it's going to be. And we have a singular opportunity with those two factors by extending Measure R for another 30 years, which would take it to 2069. We are able to borrow against future revenue to build all of the 12 projects that we were going to build over 30 years. We can now build over 10 years, 10 or 12 years at maximum. And those projects include,
This is Wendy Brule. She wants to know if you were going to be endorsing the mayor's
well,
race.
that she does. I have no idea. I have no idea.
Okay, with that, we're going to turn to the real questions.
Thank you all for your questions. We're going to try to get to every single question and go quickly. Quick answers to the questions. And so the audience has asked basically the same questions. One of them is, will you reconsider not running for mayor?
No.
Okay, that answers that. Will you be endorsing anyone?
Yeah, you just got
We got that answer. What's next for you? Congress, Senate, or NAPS?
I'm done with elective office. I don't know what's next for me. There are a lot of things I want to do. They're all going to be outside of elective office. And I'm very excited about it.
A couple questions on the MTA.
Yes.
First question is, why does the Valley get a busway while the exposition line gets something else?
Well, I tried to address that earlier. The reason is when we did the Valley Busway, we didn't have Measure R. We had nothing. There was no funding regionally for mass transportation. The only reason we got the Orange Line was because if you remember the days when the state actually had a surplus. In 2000, Governor Davis, Bob Hertzberg was the assemblyman for the flatlands of the valley, took $300 million of that surplus and appropriated it for the Orange Line, for the East-West subway, East-West busway. It's subway and busway, it's same letters, but it's one is a lot less expensive than the other. And as a result, we were able to build the busway. Remember that the busway itself was very controversial. There were people in the Sherman Oaks area, the Chandler Estates area, the synagogue on the Coldwater and Chandler. They would have hung me in effigy if they would have hung me. Not necessarily in effigy if they could have gotten their hands on me. Before there was a busway, there was talk of a subway. along the Chandler right-of-way. And the community there went nuts against the subway. We never could have afforded a subway there, and we shouldn't have built one. And then when the light rail idea came, the community out there hated the idea of a light rail. So then here comes Ray Davis with $300 million, and we said we're going to at least build a busway. That's certainly less impactful of the community than the freight trains that used to go down that railroad track every so often. And it's worked. And the answer, the question that I would ask in reverse is why do we build a light rail down Crenshaw Boulevard, or Exposition for that matter, rather than a busway? The reason is that most of my colleagues believe in building things more expensively than less expensive. And there's something about trains that capture the imagination of politicians and even some stakeholders in the transportation field. The fact is that we are carrying now on the Orange Line some 25 or 26,000 warnings a day. That is more people than ride the Pasadena Gold Line light rail project. It's more people than are currently riding the Exposition light rail, although I think the Exposition light rail is going to grow over time. But that's a lot of people. And we have more capacity to grow on the Orange Line. And we built the Orange Line for $300 million. A subway of the same length would cost us 7 times as much. And a light rail would cost us 3 or 4 times as much. So I have been an advocate at the MTA, and I haven't been successful. We own a lot of railroad rights of way throughout the region. Let's build more busways. It's so cheap, and people love it. It's not like we're forcing people to do something they don't want to do. They love it. They love to ride at grade. They like to see the outdoors. And some of our lines, including the Orange Line, you can get up there and see, you get a view of the valley, you get a view from Expo, you get a view of the city. It's enjoyable. You're not in the tunnels. So that's the question.
Next question. What assurance do we have that Measure J passes that the line along the freeway, or by freeway, will actually be built?
There's $1 billion set aside in Measure R for the 405 light rail line already. We don't have it yet. It's going to accumulate over the next 30 years. But there's $1 billion, appropriated for that project. That's a huge down payment on a light rail line through Suburban Pass. What I expect would happen if Measure J passes is that we will go to Washington and seek federal funding, New Starts money, for the light rail project from West Los Angeles to Van Nuys. The reason we think it would have a good prospect of success is that it will have a tremendous ridership. For the same reason that the 405 is the busiest freeway in the world, the public transit corridor will be one of the busiest, certainly in the United States. So I'm very confident that if we want to tunnel through the mountain, we're going to have to get federal assistance. If we don't want to tunnel through the mountain and just go, hunt the topography, we can probably do it for $1 billion to $1.5 billion. I think it's not a question whether it's going to be built, it's just a question of how.
You have direct responsibility for oversight of the Coliseum Commission.
Yes.
Many of the top executives of the commission were apparently committing felonies for years. Why weren't proper audits conducted that would have discovered this? Why did it take work from the LA Times instead of you to disclose this? And what changes have been made to review commission dealings?
Yeah. First of all, I love the LA Times. I'm a subscriber and have been since I was a college student. They did not discover this problem. They reported it. We discovered the problem. The Coliseum Commission, or the member or two of the Coliseum Commission, were approached by a contractor at the Coliseum who opened the door on the information that led to an investigation that we conducted in the summer of 2010, summer or autumn of 2010. An investigation which, if you put the whole thing from floor to, on the floor, it would be about this high. It was almost 5 feet high. We turned that over to the district attorney. That investigation that we conducted was done with the knowledge of the district attorney. And the district attorney then began his own investigation. It was only when the district attorney began his investigation that the Los Angeles Times began to report it. The first Los Angeles Times article on the subject was in late February, early March of 2011. We got tipped to what was going on in July of 2010, and we acted on it. That's first of all. Second of all, we did have audits. I can't go into any detail about it. You can use your own imagination about how satisfied we are with our audits, but our audits were always clean. Our auditors were independent of the Coliseum, always gave us a clean bill of health. What happened, and to put it very bluntly, is we were the victims of a crime, of several crimes. You don't know what you don't know when you're running an organization. If you've got somebody who is dealing deceitfully or criminally off the books, you either have to be the most paranoid person in the world to try to find that out. Who do you suspect? Your general manager, your financial officer? Well, as it turns out, it would not have been a bad idea. But you just can't operate that way. You have independent audits, you have people who are doing their job. The Coliseum was making money at the time. Everything appeared to be on the up and up. Unbeknownst to us, on the side, one of our employees had a deal with one of the contractors, off the books. We never knew about it and couldn't have known about it, except that contractor came to us and blew the whistle. So we did what once we were advised of it, we moved expeditiously to deal with it. And there will be people who will pay the price for it. Some have already paid the price for it. It's a sad situation, but to be honest with you, I've been on a lot of boards and a lot of commissions. I've never had a situation like this. But every organization, many organizations, every now and then have this kind of a problem. The city has that kind of a problem in its building and safety department, but the FBI has been all over the place. Who discovered it? Somebody came forward and squawked. The issue is, once you know about a problem, do you act on it or do you try to cover it up? Your Coliseum Commission moved on it immediately. And that's how this became public information. That's how it became a criminal action was filed. It was the Coliseum Commission and its own investigators turning their investigation over to the DA, who conducted his own investigation and indicted a bunch of people, and the trials are still pending, and there will be people who will do time as a result.
What is your advice to the city of Los Angeles concerning pension reform?
They got to get their arms around it. Pensions, and it's not just pensions, it's also salaries and salary increases. It's all part of a long continuum of financial obligations that it's not just the city of Los Angeles, but the city is deep enough into it. A long continuum of obligations that they are accruing that they cannot sustain. The reason the county, and I say this, and I can say it without being a candidate for anything, so I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but it's a good lesson. The county of Los Angeles is 3 blocks away, the headquarters is 3 blocks away from City Hall. We are represented by the same unions as the ones that represent city employees. Why is it that the county of Los Angeles has not had to lay off a single person, has not had to furlough a single person, has very robust reserves that enable us to navigate these last 4 years of recession? Why can we do that, and 3 blocks away, there's talk of bankruptcy? Why? The reason is that the elected leadership of any governmental organization has to be able to say no when no is the only answer. You can't give away 25% pay raise packages to your employees, which is what the city did in 2007, when you don't know how you're going to pay for it. That is separate from the pensions, but it influences the pension. Because my pension, if you work for the government, your pension is based on the salary you have. So when we increase salaries by 5% a year over 5 years, it not only drains our general fund to pay for the salaries, but it also commits us to paying a pension based on a higher salary. Now what's happened to the city, and it's happening to all of us, but much more so to the city, is that the amount of money that the city government has to put in out of the general fund to make the pension system whole is growing by leaps and bounds. I don't know exactly what the figure is, but if my memory serves me correctly, the projection is that sometime in the next few years, 17%, I may be off on this, 17% of every dollar that you send to the city's general fund, will be going to pay, will be going to contribute to the pension system, to keep the pension system whole as is required to be done by federal law. And it's continuing to go up. It's not a straight curve, it's a curve that started like this and is now, going up like that. We're having the same situation, but on a much smaller scale, because we have managed our salaries much more rigorously. So the answer to the question on why do we survive quite comfortably and others don't, is that we have said to our employees, to our unions, we are not going to give you a raise. We're asking you to sacrifice with us. It's not much of a sacrifice. You're going to continue to get paid. You're not going to get furloughed. We're not going to lay anybody off. So everybody who works for the County of LA can be assured that they're going to continue to be able to put food on the table. You might have a little less purchasing power than you had 3 or 4 years ago, but you're working. In the city of Los Angeles, if you're not a public safety employee, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 of the days you work, you're furloughed. That's last time I checked, it's a 20 to 25% pay cut. When I wanted to report graffiti last December in my neighborhood, I called the graffiti hotline and I got a recording. This is our furlough week. Call us back on January 4th. You don't get that kind of a recording in the county and many other cities around here. So what I say to all the mayoral candidates, and even as important, if not more importantly, to the city council members, is I know the labor unions supply a lot of resources for your campaigns, as they have for my campaigns. But if you can't say no to them when the interests of the citizenry is at stake, then you don't belong in this business. You've got to be able to say no to your friends, and what your friends are asking for is over the top. We have done that. And the city is going to have to learn to do that darn quick, or they're going to have much more serious problems than they're facing.
Thank you. Jules has, we have our giveaway, and we're going to keep taking the numbers.
All right.
Everybody, you over here.
Thank you all very much for having me.
After we take the numbers, please feel free to come up here. Also, look at the pictures over there, Jules, and
Fiscal conservatives, fiscal nuts. And we all agree that this one project, this one extension is worth it. We're going to strike while the iron is hot. And we need to do it now and seize the opportunity. That's what we're asking you to do. So Measure J, come November, is an extension of an existing sales tax. It's not an increase in the tax. You already voted to increase the tax. But what we will get in exchange for it is in your lifetime, God willing, in our collective lifetimes, we will see these projects built rather than having raised the taxes in 2008 as we thought we were doing for our children and our grandchildren. I'll say one last thing about this and then I'll stop. In 2008, when we put Measure R on the ballot, none of us could have anticipated what the economic recession was going to bring. When we voted to put the measure on the ballot, the market was collapsing. Banks, people were almost ready to make a run at the banks. You all remember this. I remember it. And it was a very unsettling period, but we really didn't know where it was going to lead. It was just the beginning. No one would have predicted in November of 2008 that we would have these sustained, very low, record low interest rates. So when we put this on the ballot, we anticipated that we were building this system in part for us and in part for our children and grandchildren. That's the way we saw it. Because we assumed interest rates of 4, 5, 6% on bonds over the period of time. We could not have anticipated interest rates of 2%, 2.5%, 3%, which the difference between 3 and 5%, there's probably a financial maven or two in this room, is billions of dollars over 30 years. So actually, to put it very bluntly, doing this now will save us a fortune over time. Because the cost, what it would cost us to do this over the next 60 years would be infinitely more expensive than the cost of doing it now. The only problem is we've got to come up with the money now. And the way to do that is to extend this tax, give us a borrowing capacity that we don't currently have, and we're off to the races. Now, the criticism of this, to the extent that there is a criticism, is why we want our grandchildren to pay for a system that we're building now. Why should we pay? Why should the grandchildren pay for a system we're building now? Our grandchildren are going to get to use this system too. And last time when I crossed the Golden Gate Bridge and I had to pay that several dollar toll, I think they've already paid off the bonds that built the Golden Gate Bridge in the 1930s. But they keep charging in order to maintain it. And I'm not talking about paying the $4 or $5 it costs to go across the Golden Gate Bridge, or the Oakland Bay Bridge, or the Verrazano Bridge down at the harbor. I'm not talking about it, even though the bonds may have been paid off, because I'm benefiting from it too. And it benefits me to know that they're maintaining it, making sure that the bridges are solid, they're not going to collapse into the water. I think we all have a stake in that. So, the only difference between waiting and doing it now is that we will get to partake of this infrastructure, not just our grandchildren. Our grandchildren are going to pay for it either way. The question is whether we will have the opportunity to take advantage of it, and the answer is we will if we extend measure R. That's why we call it measure J, just to confuse everybody. J for jobs. The collateral benefit of all of this is that we will put 250,000 people to work in this county over the next decade who are now unemployed. It's a huge deal, not just for LA County, it's a huge deal for California and for the country. Because the unemployment rate in the nation is influenced literally by the unemployment rate in Southern California. We are 20% of the 30% of the state economy here in Los Angeles, and California is 20% of the national economy. So 7 to 8% of the national economy is right here in Los Angeles County. So to paraphrase Prince Metternich, which I don't get to do very often, when Los Angeles County sneezes, the rest of the state, the rest of the country catches a cold. In this case, we don't want to catch a cold, we want to do the opposite. We want to get them healthy again. So that's what's before you. I urge you to support this. Most of your elected officials in this area support it. Mike Fewer or Zimmerman carried the legislation that authorized this. Congressman Berman, Congressman Sherman, Congressman Waxman, all of the congressmen in this area support it. It's an exciting opportunity which we should not squander. I urge you to vote yes on measure.
The first question, let me read the first question, is from a woman in the back, Wendy Grubel, I think her name is. Her first question is, why would a person with your drive, your ideas, your experience not run against Wendy Grubel?
Because I'm smarter than she is.
And
I'm very happy. I got to play with my granddaughter the last 2 weekends ago and didn't feel guilty about raising money for a political campaign. No, I appreciate the question. I appreciate all the encouragement I had from many of you. But my explanation or my statement last month is the whole story. I've been doing this for 37.5 years. And when I finish my term in December of 2014, I will have done it for almost 40 years as an elected official. And I have little more to prove to myself or to you about what I can do as an elected official, but I have a lot to prove to myself about the other things I wanted to do in my life. And none of us know how long we're going to be around. And I don't want to be regretting when I'm 73 that I should have done something when I was 63, which is what I am now.
okay,
So I'm looking forward to a new chapter in my life, but that's 2 years away, and I still have 2 very exciting years ahead.
there's a second question from Ms. Wendy Grubel. She wants to know if you're going to be endorsing the mayor's
Well,
race.
that she does. I have no idea. I have no idea.
Okay, with that, we're going to turn to the real question.
Thank you all for your questions. We're going to try to get to every single question and go quick answers to the questions. And so the audience...
Valley in South Los Angeles, Southeast Busway, between here, Sherman Oaks, and Sylmar. It includes the light rail line that we put in Measure R, which was a third-decade project, a light rail line from Westwood to Van Nuys, using the 405, the 405 small bit pass corridor. It's a huge project. It's the only north-south project that's on the books in any way, shape, or form, and the only one that's likely to ever be built again, because we have one now, the subway that goes under, essentially under Cahuenga Pass, or the west of Cahuenga Pass, and we will now, if we build it, we will have a light rail line, which will probably be done with a tunnel through Smallwood Pass. It won't be above grade or at grade level, through the mountain, and connect the San Fernando Valley to West Los Angeles in a north-south way for the first time and the last time certainly in our lifetime. So the question that we all asked ourselves over the last 3 years as we watched this economy stagnate, and we've watched interest rates go almost to zero, what can we do to take advantage of these low interest rates and low construction costs to accelerate these projects that are now in the second and third decade and bring them all into the first decade? One of the things we tried to do was to get the federal government to lend us money, what the mayor called a 30-10 plan. 30 years worth of projects in 10 years. It became known as America Fast Forward, which was finally approved by the Congress and signed by the President just a few months ago. But there's not enough money attached to it to do all of our projects, but it will help. And what we're asking the federal government to do is to loan us money now. We can put people to work, build an infrastructure that we desperately need, and take advantage of the low costs, and do it all in the next 10 years, and we will pay the federal government back over the remaining 30 years of Measure R. But it doesn't get us 12 projects built. It gets us the first decade project and part of the second decade projects built in the first decade. That's all the money that's available. So we sat around, not exactly sat around, we racked our brain, how can we leverage our local dollars to try to get the whole job done in a decade? And the way to do it was to extend the tax, not increase it, it's already in the books, it's the same tax, half-cent sales tax, but extend it from 30 to 60 years, borrow against those 60 years worth of revenues, accelerate the projects into this decade, and build the San Diego Freeway light rail line, to build the north-south busway, to build an extension of the Pasadena Gold Line out to the eastern part of the county, to build the subway to West Los Angeles, all of which, and there are many others, the southeast part of the county and the south part of the county, the Crenshaw light rail line. All of these projects together, as I said at the beginning, are a whole that is bigger than the sum of its parts. So that even though you don't live in West Los Angeles, the fact that the subway goes to West Los Angeles will be of value to some people who choose to leave their cars at home. And if we can connect the subway to the north-south light rail line over the pass, it will have a direct impact on Sherman Oaks and Encino and other parts of the South Valley. And do this for the next 10 to 12 years. It's exciting. It's an opportunity that will not present itself in all likelihood for the rest of our lives. It's not going to cost you any more than what it's costing you now, but it will get you an infrastructure in your lifetime and not in your children's or grandchildren's lifetime. And that's the issue. And we want to wait until 2039 to decide whether we want to then raise the tax, extend the tax, not raise it, but extend it at that point, and not take advantage of these low interest rates and low construction costs, or we're going to roll the dice that by 2039, interest rates will still be as low as they are today, and the construction costs will still be as low as today. They're not going to be any lower than they are today. The interest can't go below zero. I guess theoretically it could, but interest cannot go below zero, and the construction costs can't be any cheaper than they are today. So it's really not a gamble at all on our part. It's intelligent on our part to do this now. And what we get in exchange for this is we get a transportation system that we dreamed of with Measure R 4 years ago, we get it now. And I say now, next decade. We don't have to wait 3 decades for it. So that's what we're asking you to do. We're asking, by the way, the Metro Board, which doesn't agree on very many things, most of our votes on controversial issues are 7 to 6 or 8 to 5. The vote on this was 10 to 2, 11 to 2. There's a consensus on the part of the MTA Board. Our MTA Board is made up of people who represent the San Gabriel Valley, the San Fernando Valley, the South Los Angeles, the Southeast LA, from all over the place. And we all come from different walks of life, Democrats, Republicans, fiscal conservatives, fiscal nuts. And we all agree that this one project, this one extension is worth it. We've got to strike while the iron is hot. And we need to do it now and seize the opportunity. That's what we're asking you to do. So Measure J, come November, is an extension of an existing sales tax. It's not an increase in the tax. You already voted to increase the tax. But what you will get in exchange for it is in your lifetime, God willing, in our collective lifetimes, we will see these projects built rather than having raised the tax in 2008 as we thought we were doing for our children and our grandchildren. I'll say one last thing about this and then I'll stop. In 2008, when we put Measure R on the ballot, none of us could have anticipated what the economic recession was going to bring. When we voted to put the measure on the ballot, the market was collapsing. Banks, people were almost ready to make a run at the banks. You all remember this. I remember it. And it was a very unsettling period, but we really didn't know where it was going to lead. It was just the beginning. No one would have predicted in November of 2008 that we would have these sustained, very low, record low interest rates. So when we put this on the ballot, we anticipated that we were building this system in part for us and in part for our children and grandchildren. That's the way we saw it. Because we assumed interest rates of 4, 5, 6% on bonds over the period of time. We could not have anticipated interest rates of 2%, 2.5%, 3%, which the difference between 3 and 5%, there's probably a financial maven or two in this room, is billions of dollars over 30 years. So actually, to put it very bluntly, doing this now will save us a fortune over time. Because the cost of this, what it would cost us to do this over the next 60 years would be infinitely more expensive than the cost of doing it now. The only problem is we've got to come up with the money now. And the way to do that is to extend this tax, give us a borrowing capacity that we don't currently have, and we're off to the races. Now, the criticism of this, to the extent that there is